In this week's special edition, we're talking about Power Africa, President Barack Obama's initiative to increase the number of people with access to power in sub-Saharan Africa. And later on, a one-on-one conversation with hip-hop and R&B superstar Akon, who shares with us his hopes and initiatives to use solar power to provide electricity to 600 million people in Africa. Hello, I am Stella Monica Mpende. Bi-weekly, we strive to bring you stories that inspire, empower, engage, and motivate young emerging African entrepreneurs using new technology into action. The African Development Bank says that in sub-Saharan Africa, just 1 person in 5 has access to electricity, and that more than 30 African countries are now experiencing power shortages and regular interruptions in service, leading many to rely on very costly generators. But on a positive note, Power Africa is entering its 3rd year focused on completing up to 30,000 megawatts of new generation projects while adding 60 million new grid connections across the world's least electrified continent. Analysts say the $7 billion program, rolled out in Cape Town, South Africa in 2013, is likely to top President Obama's agenda on his upcoming trip to East Africa this month. Africa Innovation and Technology reporter Ndiho has our report.
More than 2/3 of the population of sub-Saharan Africa is without electricity, and more than 80% of those living in rural areas lack access to power. The Power Africa initiative is expected to build on Africa's enormous power potential, including new discoveries of vast reserves of oil and gas. Africa also has the potential to develop a clean geothermal, hydro, wind and solar energy. Andrew Haskowitz, the U.S. coordinator for Power Africa, says that life is extremely difficult without power.
Power is essential for any society, Africa, United States, anywhere. We take it for granted. But if you don't have power, children can't study at night, health clinics can't provide essential services, life-saving equipment can't operate, companies can't compete when they have to run on expensive diesel generators. So when you look at all the constraints to growth in Africa and developing world, they must always come back to power.
President Barack Obama's Power Africa initiative is aiming to expand electricity access to at least 60 million households and businesses. Speaking to African and business leaders at the U.S. Africa Business Forum, President Obama said he wants to capitalize on new opportunities on the continent.
We want to partner with Africa to build the infrastructure that economies need to flourish. And that starts with electricity, which most Africans still lack. And that's why last year, while traveling throughout the continent, I announced a bold initiative, Power Africa, to double access to electricity in sub-Saharan Africa and help bring electricity to more than 20 million African homes and businesses.
Tom Corgan, a regional program director for African Development Foundation, says that the organization is partnering with General Electric and USAID in 6 African countries.
We're funding off-grid energy projects that are funding both business-related projects, but also schools and other facilities. So it could be solar, it could be wind-powered, it could be microhydro, it could be biogas, so people can have access to electricity when they're not connected to the grid.
The World Bank forecasts Africa's economic growth will accelerate at more than 5% in 2015 and 2016, but estimates that 1 in 3 Africans, or 600 million people, need electricity. Internationally known hip-hop and R&B artist Akon is also doing his part to power Africa. His initiative, Akon Lighting Africa project, is striving to bring electricity to more than 1 million households in Africa by the end of this year.
We wanted to be able to put ourselves in a position to get to the people, because ultimately the people of Africa have to do it. And me being African, I'm part of the people, so I wanted to be in a position where I create an initiative to where no matter where and how or what face that you may be able to be facing, there's a way to make it work.
The US is hardly alone in visualizing Africa's economic potential. China, India, and Europe are moving aggressively to tap into the continent's growing markets. The Asian nation is eager to develop the roads, bridges, and ports needed to build Africa's infrastructure.
Perhaps I should add that the private sector is also leading the way, and it is trying to bring power to those people who are off the power grid. Internationally known hip-hop and R&B artist Akon is doing his part to power Africa. His initiative, Akon Lighting Africa Project, is striving to bring electricity to 600 million people and to power 1 million households in Africa. Our reporter Paul Ndiho recently caught up with him in Washington, D.C., and here is more.
How are you, Akon?
I'm fine.
A pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
First of all, let me start by asking you your vision of powering Africa.
Oh, well, the vision is to actually power Africa. The conversation's been happening for the last 5-10 years, and it's just not happening fast enough. So we wanted to be able to put ourselves in a position to get to the people, because ultimately the people of Africa have to do it. And me being African, I'm part of the people, so I wanted to be in a position where I create an initiative to where no matter where and how or what face that you may be able to be facing, there's a way to make it work. And me coming from the entertainment system, coming into energy and never knew nothing about energy, to create opportunities like this shows that anyone can actually do it. So we just want to be in a position to where we offer the opportunity more than anything, the resource to be able to create energy in Africa.
You talked about some of the kids, some of the challenges some of the young kids face over there. And in fact, you mentioned that at one point you're one of those kids. How much of a difference do you think you can make on the ground?
Oh, I think me as well as other people can make a huge difference. It only starts with one person. Then everyone is influenced shortly after. Me being an artist and having the notoriety around the world, I think helps to influence the younger kids in Africa to actually start now and not wait till later. I think the key is to start with the younger generation, educate them on how these things are, the problems that we're facing now. So that way, even as they're moving on in their education, they can start taking certain movements towards creating whatever that solution is for their future. And I think that's the goal.
How much money are you looking at investing into this project?
I mean, whatever it's going to take at this point, because I know at the end of the day, it's a bigger play. Whenever you're doing something that's that people need, it's natural that you're going to make good money from it. And ultimately, how you take that money and dispense it back into the community is how it all works out.
And how many countries are you into right now?
Right now, we're in 14 countries, and after tomorrow, we'll be in 15.
What's the 15th?
Because we're closing another one today.
Very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
Any message for young people in Africa who look up to you?
No, absolutely. I mean, Africa is your country. The message I would have for them is that you have to build it. We can't constantly just depend on the neighbors or foreign aid to come and help. When you're actually on the grounds, you see the problem, you understand what it is. So let's educate ourselves to how do we fix our country to where we can live in it comfortably and allow our children to be able to take it over.
Mr. Akon, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Still to come on the Africa Innovation and Technology channel, more than 2/3 of the population of sub-Saharan Africa is without electricity, and more than 85% of those living in rural areas lack access to power. We'll take a short break, but before we go, we want to know what you think about the Africa Innovation and Technology channel and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Twitter and Facebook, and you can also check us out on our YouTube channel. Welcome back to Africa Innovation and Technology channel, a show where we strive to bring you stories that inspire, empower, engage, and motivate young emerging African entrepreneurs into action. In case you are just joining us, this week we're talking about Power Africa, President Barack Obama's initiative to increase the number of people with access to power in sub-Saharan Africa. Power Africa is also broadening its emphasis beyond utility-scale power to help bring distributed energy, mostly off-grid solar, to parts of the continent that are not connected to a power grid. U.S. government officials, African energy ministers, along with representatives from more than 30 U.S. companies in the energy and petroleum sectors met in Ethiopia to discuss energy policies and energy-efficient technologies. Our reporter, Ndiho, has our report.
More than 85% of those living in rural areas lack access to power. President Obama explained the need for the $7 billion initiative.
Access to electricity is fundamental to opportunity in this age. It's the light that children study by, the energy that allows an idea to be transformed into a real business. It's the lifeline for families to meet their most basic needs. And it's the connection that's needed to plug Africa into the grid of the global economy. You've got to have power.
The program was formally launched to make power more accessible to Africans who are not being serviced by their national grids through small-scale energy solutions dubbed Beyond the Grid. The initiative will use partnerships with 27 investors and energy companies committing to invest over $1 billion to grow off the grid and small-scale solutions on the continent.
Our Power Africa program already supports over 25 small-scale energy projects, but Beyond the Grid will expand this significantly, facilitating over $1 billion in new private sector investments.
According to the International Energy Agency, the region will require more than $300 billion in investment to achieve universal electricity access by 2030. The Power Africa initiative aims to install 10,000 megawatts of new generation capacity, connect 20 million new customers, and improve electricity reliability across the continent. Ethiopian Prime Minister Haile Mariam welcomed the initiative, saying the private sector investment in energy had been slow.
Until recently, the private sector has not shown much interest to invest in power sector in Africa due to its long return period. We, the African governments, also have not created the necessary environment to ease the risk associated with long-term investment.
Africa is rich in energy. There are enormous untapped resources of gas, oil, coal, geothermal, solar, and wind power that could easily meet the region's requirements. Analysts say the big obstacle to electrification in Africa is not constructing power stations and building overhead power lines.
So Power Africa basically gives every developer who's trying to build a power plant in Africa a red phone, a red line to dial directly to the U.S. agencies and say, hey, I have a project in Africa, can you look at it? And what it does is it moves your project to the front of the line.
Critics say that another major problem for investors is that customers often fail to pay utilities. Unless the payment and credit problems can be resolved, electrification is unlikely to make much progress.
We now turn to Nigeria, where power supply has taken a turn for the worse in recent months. Nigeria is experiencing a severe power shortage due to increased demand, drought, and a lack of investment in the power sector. Power blackouts, also known as load shedding, are one of Nigeria's biggest challenges. As a result, the citizens and businesses have resorted to the use of electric generators to the point that its cost, which includes that of imported fuel, is as high as the size of its annual national budget, according to industry experts. Despite investing over $30 billion in opening up the industry to the private sector, the country's power generation capacity now stands at 5,500 megawatts for the first time in history for a country of over 170 million people. Paul and Ndiho, tell us more.
Nigerians, like most Africans, are accustomed to frequent power cuts. But the major electricity shortages in Nigeria are one of a kind. Blackouts touch nearly everyone, from residents and small businesses to commercial consumers. The entire country is grappling with an insufficient power grid. The overall electricity generated is falling far below the needed 11,000 megawatts. Baba Chuks works in his Abuja shop as his generator roars out power, attending to his customer and not waiting for the lights to come back on.
3 liters of petrol can be consumed because of the size of the generator, understand? So, but when you look at it, it may be 3 liters of petrol involving 300 naira. But when you check it, if there is light, for instance, at least that 300 naira is not something that you can say just for today. It's something that is continuously, because there is no day that is assured.
Nigeria is in the process of breaking up the defunct state power company into 17 private companies and selling them all for a total of $2.5 billion in hopes of increasing the nation's electric output tenfold over the next 7 years. It might be its most advanced effort yet to end Nigeria's perennial power shortfall, but progress has been slow. Industry experts say if Nigeria gets its power working properly, it would reduce business costs by up to 40%, add 3% to its gross domestic product, and cut the mass unemployment that fuels unrest and a bloody Islamist insurgency in the north. Power from generators costs more than twice as much as electricity from the grid, something doctors at this hospital know too well.
Most of the things we do here involve light. To see, to do lab, to do tests, to perform operations, and sometimes for patient comfort. So if you don't have the light, it can be very terrible.
Nigeria's electricity capacity had been in a steady decline for a decade, and despite being Africa's top oil producer and holding the world's 9th largest gas reserves, Nigeria's power output is a tenth of South Africa's for a population 3 times the size.
We need 100 of those projects before the man on the street can really have that same sense of well-being that you have in a more advanced country where you can switch on the lights and you know it's automatic.
Still, there remains optimism that wresting power out of the government's hand will eventually lead to a more reliable electric grid.
Well, on that note, do you think you have a better idea? Or have you created something that everyone is talking about? And would you like to be featured on this show? Please send us your video clips and tell us which country you're from and how your innovation is impacting your community. Well, that is our show today. Be sure to watch the Africa Innovation and Technology channel online every 2 weeks. And remember to check us out on our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you in 2 weeks. For now, so long from Washington, D.C.